Have you ever spoken up in a moment when no one believed you and wondered if your voice even mattered? Imagine being on a plane, thousands of feet above the ocean, when you notice something is wrong. You try to tell the crew, but instead of listening, they dismiss you. Passengers roll their eyes. A flight attendant silences you. And in that instant, you have a choice. Stay quiet and hope for the best, or keep speaking and risk humiliation. Now ask yourself, if it were you, would you have the courage to stand? Would you insist on being heard, knowing the lives of everyone on board could depend on it? This is the story of a black woman, calm, strong, and steady, who refused to be ignored. What happened next left an entire cabin stunned and changed the course of that flight forever. If her story makes you pause and wonder, then stay with me. Because sometimes the smallest voice carries the weight of an entire sky. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Naomi Carter adjusted the strap of her leather briefcase as she stepped onto the jet bridge at Hartsfield Jackson. The hum of rolling suitcases and the muffled chatter of passengers filled the air. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone used to airports, someone who had boarded more flights than she cared to count. Yet every time, she felt a little ripple of unease, as if the world never truly let her forget who she was. 45 years old, CEO of a clean energy technology company headquartered in Atlanta. Naomi dressed simply for travel. Dark jeans, a cream blouse, and a gray blazer. Her curls framed a face that carried both strength and gentleness. She did not advertise her status. She did not need to. Years of boardrooms and keynote speeches had taught her that dignity carried more weight than logos or titles. Today's flight was bound for New York, where she was scheduled to speak at a major energy summit. She had rehearsed her remarks in her mind during the drive to the airport, how renewable innovation wasn't just business, but survival. Yet the moment she stepped into the narrow cabin, the world of corporate presentations gave way to something smaller, more personal. The familiar scent of coffee, the hiss of air conditioning, the shuffle of strangers settling into assigned rows. Her seat was 2A, first class, window. She liked the small illusion of space it provided, a vantage point on the clouds. But as Naomi reached her row, her path was blocked. A man in his late 50s sat sprawling across both armrests, one leg stretched into her footwell. His navy sport coat was rumpled, his tie loosened. He looked up only when Naomi paused, her boarding pass still in her hand. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I believe that's my seat." The man tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "No, this is mine. I've been flying this route for 20 years. Naomi held the ticket out slightly, without raising her tone. "2A. That's what my pass says." A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Lady, you sure you're in the right cabin? Maybe check again." His voice carried enough volume for the nearby row to hear. A few passengers glanced up, then quickly looked away. The man leaned back, his voice dropping to a drawl. "Don't be an angry black woman about it." The words landed with the dull weight of something Naomi had heard too many times before. She inhaled slowly. She had learned to let her breath anchor her, to keep her steady even when the air around her grew tight. She pressed the call button above the seat. Moments later, a flight attendant appeared. Brenda Collins, chief flight attendant for the leg, wore her authority like a badge. Her blonde hair was pinned in a bun, her smile polished but distant. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, already sounding impatient. Naomi gestured toward her boarding pass. "Yes, this passenger is in my seat." Brenda glanced at the man first, as though seeking his version before Naomi's. He gave a lazy shrug. She's mistaken. I've been here a while. Brenda nodded faintly and then turned to Naomi. Ma'am, please don't make a scene. We'll sort it out later. Naomi's voice remained even. I'm not making a scene. I'm simply asking for the seat I purchased. But Brenda was already shifting her attention back to other passengers boarding. Why don't you sit in 2C for now? We'll figure this out once everyone is settled. Naomi felt the gaze of strangers pressing on her. She stood there, holding her ticket, the picture of composure. But inside, there was the familiar churn, the memory of every time her words had been dismissed, her presence questioned, her authority overlooked. She wondered, not for the first time, whether it was worth speaking up or easier to swallow the slight. She placed her bag in the overhead bin and sat in 2C, the aisle seat. She looked out the window across the man's shoulder, as if the sky itself might lend her patience. Her silence was not agreement. It was waiting. Chloe Ramirez, a younger attendant standing a few rows back, noticed the exchange. Her dark eyes flickered between Naomi and Brenda, uncertainty playing across her face. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it, caught between duty and conscience. She busied herself with helping another passenger stow a bag, but her glance lingered. The boarding process dragged on, the cabin filling with voices and footsteps. Naomi kept her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. She was used to boardrooms where silence could be more powerful than the loudest argument, but here, in this narrow cabin, her silence felt like a fragile shield. When the overhead bins closed and the captain's voice crackled through the intercom, Naomi straightened her back. The plane began to push back from the gate, and with it came the sense that the story of this flight was only just beginning. She whispered to herself, too softly for anyone else to hear, "Stay calm. Stay steady. Your truth doesn't need permission." The plane had leveled off, the familiar vibration of engines humming through the cabin like a steady drumbeat. Naomi sat in 2C, her hands folded loosely on her lap, eyes fixed on the oval window across Arthur Blake's shoulder. The man had closed his eyes as if he owned the air itself, already snoring faintly, his elbow still claiming the armrest that belonged to her. From the outside, Naomi looked calm, almost serene, but inside, thoughts swirled like crosswinds. She had been here before, in different forms, at different ages, always the same pattern, being asked to wait, being told to be patient, being told her truth was less urgent than someone else's comfort. Her mind drifted back to a grocery store in Birmingham, Alabama. She was 8 years old, standing in line with her mother, a school teacher who carried herself with quiet pride. Naomi remembered the cashier's dismissive tone when her mother asked about a discount clearly advertised on the shelf. The woman behind the register had looked past them as if their words didn't matter. Naomi had tugged on her mother's sleeve, whispering, "Why didn't she listen?" Her mother had pressed a hand to hers and said, "Because sometimes people don't want to see us, but we still stand tall." That sentence had stayed with Naomi all her life, etched deeper with each new slight. And here she was, decades later, a CEO leading hundreds of employees, yet still sitting in a plane seat that wasn't hers, because a stranger's word carried more weight than her own. She exhaled slowly, trying to ground herself. She thought of her upcoming speech in New York, the one she had drafted late at night in her quiet office, after her team had gone home. She wanted to talk about resilience, not just of machines or technology, but of people. Renewable energy, she often said, was about second chances, the ability to start again, to draw power from what the world tried to discard. Yet as the clouds drifted past the window, Naomi wondered, do I believe that for myself? Do I believe I can keep drawing strength when the world tries to waste me? Chloe Ramirez passed down the aisle, checking seatbelts. Her eyes caught Naomi's for a brief second. Naomi gave her the smallest of smiles, a silent acknowledgement. Chloe's lips parted, as if she wanted to speak, but she quickly turned to the next row. Naomi could sense the young woman's unease, her wish to do the right thing, but fear of breaking rank. Naomi had been that young once, too torn between conscience and authority. Arthur shifted in his seat, muttering something under his breath. Naomi didn't ask what. She had learned long ago that some words weren't worth chasing. Instead, she let her mind wander again, this time to a boardroom in downtown Atlanta 2 years earlier. She had been the only black woman in the room, presenting a strategy for clean energy grids. Halfway through, a junior executive had interrupted her to clarify a point she had already explained. He spoke over her, then looked around the table for approval. Naomi had waited, let the silence stretch, then quietly asked him to repeat his explanation in detail. He stumbled halfway through. The room had fallen silent. Naomi had continued, steady as stone. That day, she had realized the power of composure. Not silence as surrender, but silence as control. Yet here, thousands of feet above the ground, she felt the fragile edge of that control. The flight attendants wheeled carts down the aisle. Brenda Collins moved briskly, her smile now warmer for other passengers. When she reached Naomi's row, her tone shifted back into clipped professionalism. "Something to drink?" Brenda asked, her voice almost daring Naomi to request too much. "Water, please," Naomi said softly. Arthur ordered a whiskey. Neat. He gave a little chuckle when Brenda handed it over. Naomi kept her gaze on the window. The water was cool in her hand, grounding. She took a slow sip, letting it wash away the dryness in her throat. But inside, a storm brewed. "Do I let it go?" she asked herself. "Do I endure, like Mama used to? Or do I speak again, knowing it may fall on deaf ears?" Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. She saw her employees' faces, the young interns who looked to her as proof that they belonged in spaces no one had imagined for them. She thought of her daughter, just 19, studying engineering at Howard University. What lesson would she leave her if she stayed quiet? Her hand tightened on the plastic cup. The engines roared slightly louder as the plane adjusted altitude. Naomi felt the vibration through the floor, subtle but insistent. She frowned. Something about it felt unusual, not alarming yet, but irregular. She had spent years studying technical reports, meeting with engineers, reviewing safety data for aircraft used in her company's logistics fleet. Her ear had grown tuned to small differences, the kind that could mean nothing or everything. She pressed her palm lightly against the armrest, focusing on the rhythm. The thrum seemed uneven, like a skipped heartbeat. Her rational mind whispered, "Don't overthink. Planes are noisy. This isn't your arena." But another voice, quieter yet firmer, answered, "You know what you feel. You know what you've learned. Trust it." Her thoughts returned to her mother again. "Stand tall," she had said, not just in dignity, but in conviction. Naomi reached for the notebook tucked into her briefcase. She flipped it open to a blank page and began scribbling quickly, her handwriting sharp and angular. Possible harmonic vibration. Left engine. Could indicate blade imbalance. Request immediate inspection. Her hand shook slightly. She paused, staring at the words. If she handed this to the crew, Would they even read it, or would they dismiss her again, as Brenda had dismissed her claim about the seat? If she stayed silent and something went wrong, could she live with that? Her chest tightened. The hum of the engine seemed louder now, echoing inside her. She set her pen down, pressing her palm against the paper as if to steady both it and herself. From across the aisle, Chloe's eyes caught the movement. She raised a questioning brow. Naomi glanced at the note, then back at Chloe. For a brief moment, their gazes locked in silent understanding. Naomi folded the paper neatly, her decision made. She would act, even if her voice was once again brushed aside. She whispered under her breath, so quietly that only she could hear, "Stay calm. Stay steady. Your truth doesn't need permission." And with that, she slipped the folded note onto her lap, waiting for the right moment to pass it forward. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow as the dinner service began. The clink of glasses and the faint rustle of plastic wrappers filled the air. Naomi Carter sat still, the folded note in her lap. She felt its weight more than the water cup she held earlier. The engines hummed beneath the floor, steady yet imperfect, the irregular pulse returning like an echo she couldn't ignore. She looked to the aisle. Chloe Ramirez was 2 rows away, kneeling to help a passenger stow a bag that had slipped from the overhead bin. Chloe's movements were quick, efficient, but her eyes flicked back toward Naomi, a quiet signal that she hadn't forgotten their earlier exchange of glances. Naomi waited until Chloe passed closer, then gently held out the folded paper. Chloe hesitated, her tray balanced in one hand. "Is this for me?" she whispered. "Yes," Naomi answered softly. "Please, just take it to the cockpit. It's important." Before Chloe could reach for it, Brenda Collins appeared at the far end of the aisle, her heels clicking against the floor. She was moving with the brisk energy of someone determined to be seen as in control. Naomi pulled the note back slightly, as if sensing the danger of Brenda's presence. But Chloe's hand darted forward and took it anyway, slipping it into her apron pocket. She gave Naomi the smallest nod and moved toward the galley. Naomi exhaled slowly, her chest easing. She told herself she had done what she could. Whether or not they listened was no longer in her hands, yet her relief was short-lived. Moments later, Brenda's sharp voice cut across the cabin. "Chloe." The young attendant froze, half turned toward the cockpit door. Brenda strode up, her eyes narrowing. "What's that in your pocket?" Chloe's lips parted, searching for words. She glanced at Naomi instinctively, and that tiny glance betrayed her. Brenda reached in, plucked the folded note, and opened it right there in the aisle. Her eyes scanned the page, then her mouth twisted. "This is ridiculous," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Passengers are not engineers. You don't hand over scraps of paper pretending to know what's going on with an aircraft." Heads turned. A few passengers looked toward Naomi with curiosity, others with mild annoyance. Arthur Blake chuckled under his breath, shaking his head as if amused by the spectacle. Naomi felt her pulse rise, but she kept her voice steady. "I wrote that because I noticed something unusual. It isn't about pretending, it's about safety." Brenda folded the paper in half with exaggerated care, then tucked it into her clipboard. "We'll decide what's important. Ma'am, please stop creating unnecessary drama." The words "unnecessary drama" landed heavy, as if Naomi's concern for human lives was nothing more than a performance. Naomi clenched her jaw, but said nothing more. She knew this script. Speak too forcefully, and she would be cast as hostile. Stay silent, and she would be erased. Neither option felt like justice. Chloe lingered, caught between loyalty to her supervisor and the quiet conviction in her chest. Her eyes darted between Brenda and Naomi, guilt flickering across her face. Then she lowered her gaze and continued down the aisle, her movements suddenly mechanical. The hum of the engines pressed harder against Naomi's ears. She leaned back into her seat, staring out the window at the endless dark sky. Inside, her thoughts roared louder than the turbines. Why is my voice always questioned? Why do they only listen when it's too late? Her mind drifted again, this time to a meeting in Washington. D.C. She had been testifying before a congressional committee about renewable grid stability. Mid-sentence, one senator leaned back in his chair and muttered to the man beside him, "Does she even understand the numbers she's quoting?" He hadn't realized his microphone was live. Naomi had paused, adjusted her papers, then calmly repeated the statistics in sharper detail, leaving no doubt. She remembered the red flush rising on the senator's face, the way he couldn't meet her eyes afterward. That memory gave her a sliver of steadiness now. She whispered silently, "Stay calm, stay steady." Brenda returned to the galley, satisfied that she had reasserted control. Arthur leaned closer, muttering so only Naomi could hear, "You people always think you know better. Just sit back and let the real professionals do their job." Naomi didn't look at him. She didn't need to. The sting of his words landed all the same, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of reaction. Instead, she pressed her hand lightly against the armrest again. Feeling for the rhythm beneath her, the uneven tremor was still there, faint but undeniable. She knew she wasn't imagining it. Years of training her instincts told her otherwise. Her fingers curled around the edge of the seat. She thought of her daughter again, of the message she wanted to pass on. That truth mattered, even when no one wanted to hear it, especially then. Chloe passed again, collecting empty cups. As she leaned close, she whispered so faintly Naomi almost didn't catch it, "I believe you." Naomi turned her head, their eyes meeting for a brief second. Gratitude softened her expression. She gave the smallest nod, a silent, "Thank you." That was enough to kindle a spark of hope. Even if Brenda held the note captive, someone else had heard her truth. The minutes stretched on. Dinner trays were cleared, lights dimmed further, passengers settled with movies or books. The cabin had grown quieter, but inside Naomi, the storm only deepened. She imagined the folded note in Brenda's clipboard, dismissed without thought, sitting useless while the engines carried hundreds of lives through the night sky. She closed her eyes, not to rest, but to gather strength. She knew the conflict was not over. The story of this flight was still unfolding, and somewhere ahead, another moment would come when she would have to stand tall again. The hours in the air always stretched in peculiar ways. For most passengers, time softened under movies and headphones, meals and light naps. But for Naomi Carter, time sharpened. Every sound, every vibration of the aircraft pressed into her awareness. She had trained herself to notice patterns, to pay attention, and now, with the folded note taken from her, she had only her senses left. She pressed her palm flat against the armrest again, letting her body become a quiet sensor. At first, the vibration was steady, almost like the reassuring purr of an engine in balance. Then, like a skipped beat in music, it faltered, a subtle imbalance, brief but undeniable. Naomi's jaw tightened. It wasn't panic that filled her, it was recognition. She leaned back, her eyes fixed on the window where darkness stretched like an endless ocean. The moon cast faint silver light across the wing. She studied its movement. Smooth, but perhaps too smooth. She imagined the turbine blades spinning thousands of times per second, each one dependent on perfect balance. A slight fracture could create harmonic vibration, building until the system strained. She had read reports of such cases, rare but catastrophic when ignored. Her fingers tapped on her knee unconsciously, mimicking the rhythm she felt beneath the floor. The pattern didn't ease, it lingered, pulsing. Naomi thought of her company's research facility, the way engineers would huddle over test engines, measuring the tiniest oscillations. She had sat with them often, not just as a CEO but as a partner in thought. She remembered one engineer, a young woman named Marisol, saying, "Engines talk. The question is whether we listen." That sentence returned now with eerie clarity. The cabin around her buzzed with ordinary life. A man 2 rows back laughed loudly at a comedy film. A child fussed until her mother hushed her with a soft lullaby. Flight attendants whispered near the galley. To them, the flight was routine, but to Naomi, the irregular thrum beneath her feet was anything but routine. Her chest rose and fell slowly as she debated with herself. Do I try again? Do I risk more ridicule? She pictured Brenda's smirk when she dismissed the note. She heard Arthur's mocking whisper. She felt the sting of every boardroom interruption she had endured, every dismissal coded in polite condescension. And yet she also thought of her daughter, her interns, the people who believed in her voice. What lesson would silence teach them? Naomi opened her briefcase again, more deliberate this time. She took out her notebook and began to write with slow precision. Observed engine vibration inconsistent with steady state, pattern irregular, possible harmonic resonance, left side more pronounced, recommend immediate inspection upon landing. She underlined immediate inspection twice. Her handwriting was steady now, her doubt replaced with conviction. She tore out the page carefully and folded it. Her decision was made. She would not stay quiet. But before she could move, Arthur stirred. His eyes opened, narrowing at her paper. You writing complaints again, he muttered, voice thick with disdain. Naomi did not answer. She kept her focus forward, her lips pressed in a calm line. Arthur snorted and leaned back, pretending to sleep again. Naomi waited for Chloe to pass. Minutes ticked by. When the young attendant finally approached, Naomi held out the folded page again. Chloe hesitated, glancing toward the galley where Brenda was speaking to another crew member. Please, Naomi whispered. This matters. Chloe's hand trembled as she took the note, sliding it quickly into her apron pocket. This time she didn't pause. She walked straight toward the cockpit, her steps faster than before, her face set with quiet resolve. Naomi's chest eased for the first time in hours. She leaned back, eyes closing briefly, whispering her silent mantra. Stay calm. Stay steady. Your truth doesn't need permission. The engines hummed on, their rhythm uneven, their story waiting to be heard. And somewhere beyond the locked cockpit door, Naomi hoped, someone finally would listen. Chloe Ramirez walked briskly toward the cockpit, her apron pocket pressing against the folded note Naomi Carter had handed her. She kept her gaze low, hoping to slip through unnoticed. But fate has a way of testing courage at the very moment it begins to bloom. Chloe? The sharp sound of her name froze her mid-stride. Brenda Collins' voice carried the authority of years in the role, and the weight of a woman who did not tolerate defiance. Chloe turned slowly, her heart beating fast. Brenda stood at the galley entrance, arms crossed, eyes narrowing like searchlights. What's that in your pocket? Brenda asked. Chloe hesitated, and that pause betrayed her. Brenda stepped forward, her hand quick, plucking the folded paper before Chloe could react. Brenda unfolded it with a dramatic flick, scanning the handwriting, her lips curled. Engine vibration, harmonic resonance. Who does she think she is? Her gaze darted toward Naomi, who sat silently in 2C, back straight, eyes steady. Passengers nearby began to murmur. Curious. Arthur Blake leaned over with a chuckle. "Oh, she's an expert now," he said loudly, making sure others heard. Brenda shook her head, her tone clipped and dismissive. "This is nonsense. Passengers do not diagnose airplanes." "Ma'am," she said, addressing Naomi directly now, "I need you to stop creating distractions. If you continue, we will have to consider this disruptive behavior." The word disruptive hit like a blade. Naomi had heard it before, in offices, in conference calls, in quiet whispers when she dared to challenge. She took in a slow breath, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not being disruptive. I'm asking you to pass along a safety concern. That is all." Brenda's smile was thin, brittle. "The safety of this aircraft is our responsibility, not yours. Now please let us do our job." She folded the paper sharply and slid it into her clipboard, as though locking it away erased the truth written on it. Chloe's face reddened. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, caught between fear and conscience. Naomi saw the conflict written across the young woman's features, and her heart ached for her. She remembered her own early career, silenced by supervisors, trapped between what she knew was right and what she was told to obey. Arthur leaned closer, muttering just loud enough for Naomi to hear, "You people always think you've got something special to say. Maybe sit back and let the professionals handle it." Naomi didn't turn to him. She had no need to. His words landed, heavy and familiar, but they did not define her. The cabin around them shifted uneasily. Some passengers avoided looking her way, preferring the safe neutrality of silence. Others exchanged glances. Curiosity mingled with discomfort. Only Chloe's eyes lingered, guilt and respect battling in their dark depths. Naomi folded her hands in her lap, her knuckles white for a moment before she forced them to relax. She whispered inside herself, the mantra that had carried her through boardrooms and hearings, protests and policy meetings. Stay calm, stay steady. Your truth doesn't need permission. But inside, a storm raged. She thought of her daughter, of the lessons she wanted to pass on that speaking mattered, even when no one listened. She thought of her employees, who looked to her as proof that their voices, too, belonged in rooms of power. What example would she set if she surrendered now? Her chest tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of choice. Silence could protect her dignity in the short term, but at what cost? Her voice mattered not for pride, but for lives. Brenda moved down the aisle, her posture tall, her authority reasserted. The clipboard pressed against her side as if the captured note were a trophy. Naomi's gaze shifted to the window again. Outside, the wing sliced through moonlight. The engine hummed beneath, its rhythm unchanged, uneven. To everyone else it was background noise. To her, it was a message. Listen. She leaned forward slightly, resting her hand against the armrest once more. The vibration pulsed beneath her skin. Not imagination, not nerves, real. Her eyes closed. She remembered a conversation years ago, in a lab filled with humming machines. One of her engineers had said, "The smallest imbalance today becomes the catastrophe of tomorrow." She had nodded then, storing the wisdom. Tonight, at 30,000 feet, the words rang louder than ever. Naomi's thoughts wavered between past and present, pride and exhaustion. She recalled walking into a shareholders' meeting where half the room doubted her right to lead, where questions were sharper for her than for her peers. She had stood her ground, laid out her data, and left no opening for doubt. Yet even then, whispers followed her out the door. Now, here in the confined aisle of a first-class cabin, the same dynamic replayed itself, smaller in scale but sharper in sting. Her expertise dismissed, her concern belittled, her very presence deemed disruptive. She let the anger rise, then channeled it into stillness. That was her gift, her weapon, the refusal to be moved by disrespect. Chloe returned quietly, gathering cups and trays, her movements stiff. As she passed Naomi, she bent slightly, whispering so faintly it was almost lost in the hum. "I'm sorry. I tried." Naomi gave her a small nod. Her lips curved in a gentle smile, forgiving, though her heart ached for the young woman caught in the crossfire. The flight continued, its rhythm steady on the surface, unsteady underneath. The passengers drifted back to their movies and books, their conversations and naps. But Naomi sat upright, eyes alert, every nerve tuned to the subtle tremor beneath her feet. The note might have been taken, her words dismissed, but she knew the truth, and she knew truth had a way of breaking through, no matter how tightly someone tried to fold it away. She whispered again, steady, resolute, "Stay calm, stay steady." And in the silence that followed, the engines whispered back, their uneven hum reminding her that the story was not over, not by a long stretch. The cabin lights dimmed further as the flight entered cruising altitude. Most passengers surrendered to sleep, the glow of screens fading row by row. Yet Naomi Carter remained awake, her body taut with alertness, her mind replaying every vibration she felt through the floor. She did not notice Captain Marcus Thorne step out from the cockpit at first. He was tall, with the calm bearing of someone who had spent decades in the air. His uniform was immaculate, the gold stripes on his sleeve catching the faint light. What drew attention, however, was not his appearance but the rare act of a captain walking into the cabin mid-flight. Passengers stirred, curious. Whispers rippled across first class. Brenda Collins straightened, her authority flashing back into place. "Captain, is everything all right?" she asked quickly, her voice pitched just loud enough to imply control. Marcus's eyes were steady. "I'd like to speak to the passenger in seat 2C." The words dropped like a stone into water. Heads turned, eyes found Naomi. Naomi met his gaze with quiet strength. She had not called for him, but she knew immediately what this meant. Chloe had found her courage after all. Brenda forced a smile, brittle at the edges. "Captain, it's unnecessary." She was just Marcus raised a hand, silencing her with professional ease. His authority was different from hers, not loud, not defensive, but absolute. "Miss Carter, would you mind joining me near the galley?" Naomi rose slowly, smoothing her blazer, every movement deliberate. She walked down the aisle, each step carrying not just her weight, but the unspoken history of moments like this, where dignity was tested, and the world watched silently. Near the galley, Marcus gestured respectfully. "I received a note," he said quietly. "I wanted to hear from you directly." Brenda lingered close, but Marcus turned, his voice firm now. "Chief Collins, thank you. I'll take it from here." For the first time that night, Brenda hesitated. Then, stiffly, she retreated a few steps, though her eyes never left them. Marcus's gaze returned to Naomi. "You mentioned unusual vibration." Naomi nodded. "Yes, Captain. Starboard engine. It's subtle but persistent. Not turbulence. A harmonic imbalance." I believe it could indicate an issue with the turbine blade resonance. I've worked with diagnostic systems on large-scale turbines for years. It feels off. Marcus listened intently, no skepticism in his eyes. Instead, he leaned slightly closer, his voice even. "You're an engineer, clean energy systems," Naomi replied. "My company designs hybrid turbines for grid-scale power. I may not be a mechanic for this aircraft, but I know the signature of stress in a rotating system, and this concerns me." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. He studied her, weighing not just her words, but the conviction behind them. Finally, he exhaled. "I've flown 30 years. I know when a passenger is panicking, and I know when a passenger is paying attention." "You're not panicking." "I don't panic," Naomi said softly, "but I don't ignore signals either." A faint smile touched his lips, brief and serious all at once. "Neither do I." Behind them, Brenda shifted impatiently. "Captain, with all respect, this is highly irregular. We can't just—" Marcus turned his head slightly, his tone still calm but edged with authority that brooked no challenge. "Collins, I said I'll take it from here." Brenda's mouth tightened, but she held her tongue. Marcus lowered his voice. "Ms. Carter, would you be comfortable coming forward to the cockpit? I'd like you to describe exactly what you felt to me and my first officer. We'll monitor and cross-check." The air in the cabin shifted instantly. Passengers who had been pretending to read or rest now leaned forward, wide-eyed. An invitation to the cockpit was nearly unheard of in today's age. Naomi hesitated, not out of fear, but out of the weight of what it meant. She glanced around the watching eyes, the curious whispers. She saw Arthur Blake, his smirk gone, replaced by open surprise. She saw Chloe Ramirez, standing stiff with hope and nerves. She met Marcus's gaze again. His expression was professional. Yes, but there was something more: respect. The kind she had fought for, room by room, year by year. "Yes," Naomi said finally. "I'll come." A hush fell as Marcus gestured her forward. Brenda's eyes flashed, caught between fury and humiliation. Yet she could do nothing as Naomi stepped past her, following Marcus toward the cockpit. For Naomi, each step was heavy with memory. She thought of boardrooms where her suggestions were dismissed until repeated by others. She thought of airports where her credentials were scrutinized longer than those of colleagues. She thought of her daughter's small hand slipping into hers once, asking, "Why do they treat you different?" Mama, and now, here, before dozens of silent witnesses, the captain himself had chosen to listen. At the cockpit door, Marcus paused, keying the secure lock. "You'll just stand behind us, if that's all right. You don't need to touch anything, just tell us what you noticed." "Of course," Naomi said. Her tone carried the balance of deference to procedure and confidence in her truth. The door clicked open. Naomi stepped inside, the hum of instruments filling her ears, lights blinking across the panels. The space felt both cramped and infinite, like stepping into the beating heart of the machine. First Officer Daniel Kim turned, surprised. Marcus introduced them quickly. "This is Dr. Naomi Carter. She's raised a concern I'd like us to monitor." Kim blinked, then nodded respectfully. Naomi leaned slightly forward, describing what she had felt, the uneven frequency, the vibration's cadence. As she spoke, Marcus and Kim exchanged glances, fingers dancing across switches, monitoring readings. For a moment, silence stretched. Then Kim frowned. "There's a slight oscillation on N2 readings. Minor, but she might be right." Marcus nodded slowly, his face tightening. "We'll keep a close eye." "Thank you, Dr. Carter." Naomi stepped back, her breath even. Inside, her heart surged not with triumph, but with relief. She had been heard. When she exited the cockpit minutes later, the entire first-class cabin was watching. Some faces showed admiration, others disbelief. Arthur's smirk was gone entirely. Chloe's lips curved into the smallest, proudest smile. Brenda's arms were crossed, her fury thinly veiled. Naomi returned to her seat with quiet dignity. She didn't need to announce what had happened. The silence in the cabin carried the message louder than words the captain had listened. And something had shifted. And in the quiet that followed, Naomi allowed herself the smallest exhale, a release of tension she had carried for hours. The story was not over, not yet. But for the first time that night, the tide had begun to turn. When Naomi Carter returned from the cockpit, the cabin felt different. The quiet murmur of travelers had turned into something else, a charged silence that carried weight. Dozens of pairs of eyes followed her as she slid back into seat 2C. She adjusted her belt calmly, even as her pulse quickened. Arthur Blake shifted loudly in his seat beside her, his irritation practically spilling into the aisle. "Unbelievable," he muttered, though loud enough for others to hear. The captain letting passengers stroll into the cockpit like it's a sightseeing tour, whole plane's gone crazy. Naomi didn't respond. Her gaze remained steady on the seat back ahead. Silence, she had learned long ago, could speak louder than protest. 2 rows behind, a woman in her 50s leaned forward. "Excuse me," she said, her voice warm. "I just want to thank you. I saw how that attendant brushed you off earlier. Took courage to keep insisting." Naomi turned slightly, surprised by the kindness. The woman smiled softly. "My husband's an engineer. Says machines whisper before they scream. You might have just saved us all." The words rippled through the cabin like a spark. Some passengers nodded, others exchanged doubtful glances. Arthur barked a laugh. "Saved us, please. This is paranoia dressed up as expertise. Planes vibrate. That's what they do. You all want to make her a hero because she can spout some jargon." The woman behind narrowed her eyes. Better jargon than ignorance. Arthur's face flushed. His voice rose, sharp. "Oh, here we go." Anyone questions her, and suddenly we're the villains. What if she's wrong? What if she just wanted attention? Chloe Ramirez appeared then, moving down the aisle with careful steps, offering drinks. She paused near Naomi, her voice quiet but intentional. "The captain is monitoring the situation. That's all passengers need to know." Arthur seized the moment. "Exactly my point. Monitoring, not panicking. Because there's nothing wrong." He raised his voice further. "And yet we're wasting time and making people nervous because one person couldn't just enjoy her seat." Heads turned. Some nodded faintly in agreement. Others frowned. The cabin had become a fragile balance, tilting between sides. Naomi remained calm. She felt every stare pressing on her, but she refused to shrink. Her voice, when it came, was even and clear. "I didn't ask for the captain to believe me. I only asked to be heard. What he does with that is his responsibility. Just as each of us has a responsibility when something feels wrong." The quiet dignity of her words unsettled Arthur more than any argument. He shook his head, muttering under his breath, but offered no comeback. For a moment, the tension eased. Then another passenger, a man in a business suit near the window, spoke up. "Look, I respect what you're saying, ma'am, but let's not forget you're not a pilot. You could be mistaken. I don't know how comfortable I am with passengers influencing the cockpit." A younger man across the aisle cut in quickly. And what if she's right? You'd rather dismiss someone because it's inconvenient than consider she might be saving your skin. The debate ignited. Voices overlapped, some defending Naomi, some echoing Arthur's skepticism. Words like safety, paranoia, and overreaction floated above the rows like stray sparks. Through it all, Naomi stayed still, inside. Her chest ached with the familiar weight, the battle, not just to speak, but to be trusted. She thought of boardrooms where silence was mistaken for weakness, of airports where patience was mistaken for guilt. And yet, in this moment, she chose neither silence nor anger. She chose steadiness. She turned her head slightly toward Chloe, who lingered nearby, eyes flicking anxiously between passengers. Naomi offered her the smallest nod, a quiet signal. "I'm all right." Chloe returned it with relief, then continued down the aisle. Minutes passed. The arguments dulled into mutters, then into uneasy silence. The glow of seatback screens returned, though fewer passengers seemed absorbed by them now. Instead, they stole glances at Naomi, as if waiting to see whether her calm would crack. But Naomi did not waver. She closed her eyes, breathing evenly, her hands resting lightly on the armrest. The vibration beneath the floor remained subtle, persistent. She felt it as clearly as the tension in the cabin itself. And then, a sound cut through the quiet. The intercom clicked, and Captain Marcus Thorne's voice filled the space, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I want to reassure you that we are monitoring the aircraft closely. There is no immediate danger. However, we did detect a minor irregularity in engine readings, and we are taking every precaution. Safety is our highest priority." The words froze the cabin. For those who doubted Naomi, it was a jolt. For those who had supported her, it was validation. Arthur shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight. The man in the suit sank back into his seat, silent. The woman behind Naomi whispered a quiet, "Thank God." Naomi opened her eyes slowly. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply breathed, the faintest relief loosening her chest. She had not wanted vindication for herself. She had wanted assurance for everyone, but the shift in the cabin was undeniable. Respect lingered now in the glances aimed her way. Curiosity, too. The tide of opinion had turned, though not entirely. Skepticism lingered in corners, yet doubt had been cracked open. And from that crack, truth was beginning to shine through. Naomi leaned back once more, her voice silent, her posture steady. She had done what she could. The rest now belonged to the sky, the engines, and the men in the cockpit who had chosen to listen. And as the aircraft sailed on through the night, the cabin carried more than passengers. It carried the fragile, shifting weight of belief. The captain's announcement lingered in the air long after the intercom clicked off. Passengers sat in a kind of suspended quiet, processing his words. Naomi Carter could feel the shift in energy, curiosity, unease, and grudging respect blended into something new. For a brief moment, she thought perhaps the tension would settle. But Brenda Collins was not done. The chief flight attendant strode down the aisle, her polished shoes clicking against the floor, her expression taut with determination. She stopped beside Naomi's row, her shadow falling across the seat. "Ms. Carter," Brenda said, her voice pitched louder than necessary. "I think we need to clarify a few things. You've caused unnecessary alarm among our passengers. That is not acceptable." Naomi lifted her gaze, calm but steady. "I didn't cause the alarm." The captain simply confirmed what I already noticed. My only intent was safety. Brenda's lips thinned. She turned slightly so her voice could carry to the rows nearby. Safety is the responsibility of trained crew, not passengers with personal theories. What you did undermines authority and disrupts order. Do you understand that the accusation hung heavy? Passengers shifted in their seats, some watching with wide eyes, others frowning at Brenda's tone. Naomi took a slow breath. She had lived through versions of this moment before in offices, in boardrooms, in places where her expertise was questioned simply because it came from her mouth. Her voice, when it came, was soft but clear. I understand responsibility. Chief Collins, I lead hundreds of employees who trust me to make decisions that affect their safety and livelihood. Responsibility means listening, not dismissing. If I had remained silent and something happened, could you live with that? The quiet power in her words landed harder than volume ever could. A murmur rose among passengers. Brenda's cheeks flushed. You are not the captain. You are not licensed to assess aircraft systems. You have no authority here. Naomi's eyes didn't waver. Authority is earned by action, not by title alone. The cabin seemed to tighten around them. Arthur Blake, sensing opportunity, piped up again. Finally, someone's saying it. This whole circus has been about one woman making herself important. Chief Collins is right. We don't need self-appointed experts. From behind, the middle-aged woman passenger spoke firmly. She didn't appoint herself. The captain invited her. Maybe you should listen instead of sneering. Arthur scoffed, but his words faltered under the sharpness of her tone. Brenda tried again, her voice sharp. Ms. Carter, unless you want to be formally reported for interfering with flight operations, I suggest you stop this now. Gas rippled through the cabin. Passengers leaned forward, tension palpable. Chloe Ramirez, standing a few rows back with a tray in her hands, froze. Her eyes darted between Naomi and Brenda, fear flickering in her expression. Naomi felt the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. She could retreat, accept silence, and avoid escalation. Or she could stand, not just for herself, but for every quiet dismissal she had endured, every voice that had been ignored because of who carried it. Her choice was clear. She unbuckled her seatbelt slowly, rising to her feet. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Naomi faced Brenda directly, her voice calm, her tone deliberate. You may file whatever report you wish, but I will not apologize for speaking up when I felt something was wrong. That is not interference. That is humanity. And if you think that defending dignity and safety deserves punishment, then you've lost sight of what your uniform stands for. The words struck with quiet force. Chloe's lips parted, her eyes bright with something like awe. The supportive woman behind Naomi clapped once, softly but firmly. The sound startled the cabin into awareness. Another passenger joined in, then another. Within seconds, a scattering of applause echoed through first class. Brenda's face went crimson. She stood frozen, the authority she clung to crumbling beneath the weight of collective judgment. For the first time all night, she seemed small. Arthur muttered angrily, but his words drowned in the clapping. He sank back into his seat, scowling. Naomi didn't smile. She didn't revel in victory. She simply lowered herself back into her seat, her expression composed, her breath even. She had not spoken for applause. She had spoken because silence was no longer acceptable. The clapping faded, leaving a heavy quiet that was different now, less divided, more united. Passengers shifted with new energy, as if they too, had found a piece of their own voices. Brenda lingered, her jaw clenched. For a moment, it seemed she might lash out again. But then she turned sharply on her heel and marched back toward the galley, her posture stiff with wounded pride. Naomi exhaled slowly, her hands resting on the armrest. The vibration beneath her feet still hummed, faint but insistent. The story wasn't over, but something had changed. She was no longer alone. As the engines carried them through the dark sky, Naomi closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. She had faced confrontation, humiliation, and doubt. And yet, through steady calm, she had turned the tide not with force, but with dignity. The cabin settled once more, but it was no longer the same cabin. It carried the echo of her words, the sound of applause, the quiet acknowledgement that one voice, steady and sure, could shift the balance of an entire room or an entire flight. The applause had long since faded, replaced by the soft hum of the engines and the occasional rustle of passengers adjusting in their seats. On the surface, calm had returned, but underneath, tension simmered like an invisible current. Naomi Carter sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes half closed. She was not resting. She was listening. The vibration was still there, faint, persistent, almost like a heartbeat out of rhythm. She felt it through the soles of her shoes, through the armrest, even in the cadence of her breath. She didn't need instruments to know it hadn't gone away. Across the aisle, the younger man who had defended her earlier leaned toward his neighbor. "You hear?" that he whispered, kind of like a low buzz. His neighbor frowned, then nodded slowly. "Thought it was just me." Their hushed exchange spread uneasily. Passengers shifted, pressing feet against the floor, straining ears toward the drone of the engines. Some shook their heads, dismissing it. Others looked around nervously, as if waiting for Naomi to speak again. Arthur Blake groaned theatrically. "Oh, for God's sake, now you've all got phantom vibrations. Next thing, you'll say the wings are flapping too hard." His sarcasm rang hollow this time. No one laughed. Before Naomi could respond, the intercom crackled. Captain Marcus Thorne's voice, steady but edged with focus, filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are continuing to monitor a minor irregularity on the starboard engine. Out of an abundance of caution, we've adjusted our power settings. There is no immediate danger, but we are in contact with ground control and maintenance teams. I'll keep you informed." Gasps broke the silence. A woman clutched her husband's hand. A businessman pulled off his headphones, eyes wide. The younger man across the aisle murmured, "She was right." Arthur stiffened, his face pale, but he forced a scoff. Minor irregularity. They said minor, yet even he avoided Naomi's eyes now. Naomi inhaled deeply, steadying her thoughts. She knew enough about aviation to understand a minor irregularity could remain just that, or it could spiral into something worse if ignored. She glanced toward the galley. Chloe Ramirez was standing rigid, her tray abandoned, eyes fixed on the cockpit door. Moments later, Marcus himself emerged again. His calm demeanor hadn't cracked, but his eyes carried gravity. He moved directly to Naomi's row. "Dr. Carter," he said quietly, "could I have another moment of your time?" The cabin rustled. Passengers leaned closer, pretending not to eavesdrop but unable to resist. Naomi rose smoothly, following Marcus to the galley once more. Brenda Collins appeared instantly, her voice sharp. "Captain, this is highly irregular." "You can't, Collins," Marcus cut in firmly. "Stand down." The authority in his tone brooked no debate. Brenda froze, her mouth snapping shut, though her glare lingered. Marcus turned to Naomi, lowering his voice. We're seeing readings that suggest slight oscillation in the turbine. It's within operating limits, but it matches what you described. I'd like you to tell me again, in detail, what you sensed. Naomi spoke carefully, outlining the uneven cadence, the resonance that seemed to fluctuate, the way it felt different from turbulence or normal vibration. Marcus listened intently, nodding as if each word confirmed something he already suspected. I appreciate your clarity, he said at last. We're preparing contingency procedures. I'll update the cabin soon. For now, stay calm. Your composure helps more than you realize. Naomi inclined her head. I will. As she returned to her seat, whispers rose again. Passengers craned their necks, trying to read her face. She offered no dramatic expression, only calm steadiness. Yet that calm became contagious. People straightened, took slower breaths, settled themselves. Arthur, for once, said nothing. Minutes stretched. Then the aircraft shuddered not violently, but enough that drinks rippled in their cups and passengers stiffened in alarm. A man in row 4 muttered, "What was that?" His wife clutched his arm, eyes wide. Naomi's pulse quickened, though her face remained composed. She recognized the shift the vibration had deepened, more insistent now. The irregularity was growing. The intercom chimed again. Marcus's voice was steady, but firmer. Ladies and gentlemen, we've observed additional fluctuation in engine performance. Out of caution, we are preparing for a possible diversion. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened. There is no immediate threat, but safety requires proactive measures. The word diversion rippled like thunder through the cabin. Gasps, murmurs, anxious glances. Arthur finally broke his silence, his voice strained. This is ridiculous. We'll be stranded in the middle of nowhere because she felt a tickle under her feet. This time, the younger man shot back. Would you rather ignore it and risk going down in flames? Because that's what ignoring warnings gets you, the middle-aged woman added, her voice strong. If not for her, we might not even know. I'd rather be stranded than sorry. The cabin fractured again, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uneasily, doubt gnawing. Naomi stayed seated, her hands resting on her lap, but her eyes swept the rows. She saw fear rising, division hardening. She knew what fear could do: fracture unity, erode trust, spark chaos. She leaned slightly into the aisle, her voice calm but carrying. Everyone, please. This isn't about blame or fear. The captain is doing exactly what good leaders do: listening, verifying, acting before small problems grow larger. That's safety. That's responsibility. We are in good hands. Her words settled over the cabin like a blanket. The panic softened. The murmurs slowed. People exhaled, some even nodded. For the first time, Naomi felt her role shift: not just an observer, not just a dismissed passenger, but a bridge between fear and reason. She had become, whether she wanted it or not. The voice passengers leaned toward when trust faltered. The engines droned on, the vibration deeper now. The night sky endless outside the windows. But inside the cabin, amid tension and uncertainty, Naomi's quiet steadiness carried weight. She had spoken once for safety. Now she spoke for calm. And both, she knew, were needed if they were to reach the ground together. The aircraft trembled again. This time it wasn't subtle. The shudder rippled from nose to tail, jolting cups, rattling trays, and tightening every passenger's grip on the armrests. Gas cut the silence. and a child cried out before being hushed by her mother. Naomi Carter felt the vibration settle deep into her bones. It was no longer just a whisper, it was a warning. She kept her breath even, though her pulse surged. The intercom chimed almost immediately. Captain Marcus Thorne's voice, calm but clipped, filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've observed a significant fluctuation in the starboard engine. We are executing precautionary procedures and preparing to divert to the nearest suitable airport. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened. The crew is fully trained for this situation." The words "significant fluctuation" landed like cold steel. The unease Naomi had felt all night now spread across the cabin in waves. Passengers exchanged frantic looks. The businessman in the window seat muttered prayers under his breath. Even Arthur Blake's bravado had cracked. He sat stiff, pale, jaw clenched, offering no commentary this time. Brenda Collins swept down the aisle, her expression taut. She tried for authority, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Everyone, please stay calm. We're in control." Few believed her. Then, to the shock of the entire cabin, Marcus appeared once more at the door. He moved swiftly toward Naomi's seat, his composure unbroken, but his urgency plain. "Dr. Carter," he said quietly, though the rows around them strained to hear, "I need you in the cockpit again. We'd like you to describe exactly what you sensed as this progressed. It may help us isolate the issue." Naomi blinked. She had expected to remain a voice from the cabin, not to be called forward again, and certainly not in front of every passenger. Yet here it was, the moment that erased all pretense. The captain wasn't just listening. He was inviting her into the very heart of decision-making. Brenda stepped forward, aghast. "Captain, this is against every protocol. You cannot bring a passenger into." Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Collins, that's enough." The entire cabin held its breath. Naomi stood slowly, smoothing her blazer as if she were walking into a boardroom filled with rivals. The passengers' eyes followed her, wide with shock, admiration, even relief. Arthur's voice broke the silence, brittle and faint. "You've got to be kidding me." But no one answered him. Naomi followed Marcus down the aisle, every step echoing like a drumbeat. At the cockpit door, Marcus keyed in the code. The lock clicked, the heavy door swung open, and Naomi stepped inside. The cockpit was a world apart, glowing panels, screens alive with numbers, the constant hum of engines vibrating through metal and bone. First Officer Daniel Kim sat focused, his eyes darting between gauges. His jaw tightened as he nodded briefly at Naomi. Marcus gestured toward a small standing space behind the seats. "Dr. Carter, please stay there. Just tell us what you notice. Nothing more." Naomi nodded. Understood. The air was thick with tension. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the rhythm beneath her feet. Then she opened them, her voice calm. "The vibration has deepened. It's not random, it's cycling. That suggests a harmonic resonance. If it continues, stress fractures could propagate in the turbine blades." Kim shot Marcus a look. "That matches the spikes we're seeing on N2. Marcus's jaw set. "Options reduce thrust to minimum stable levels." Kim replied. "Divert and shut down if it escalates." Marcus nodded, already adjusting controls with practiced precision. Naomi watched quietly, resisting the urge to do more. She knew her place here wasn't to act, but to translate what she felt into words they could measure. Still, part of her a leader, an engineer, ached to do more. Marcus glanced back at her briefly. "You've got sharp instincts. Most wouldn't have noticed, Naomi answered softly. Machines talk. We just have to listen. The cockpit fell silent again, broken only by the drone of engines and the faint, unsettling tremor that ran through the airframe. Then, with a low thud, the right engine coughed. Lights flickered red across the panel. Kim's voice tightened, vibration index spiking. Marcus's tone stayed calm, even as his hands moved quickly across switches. All right, we're shutting down number 2. Confirm. Confirmed, Kim replied. His voice clipped. The engine's roar dulled, leaving the cabin with a strange, uneven hum. The silence from the right side was deafening in its own way. Marcus pressed the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. As part of our safety protocols, we've shut down one engine. This aircraft is fully capable of flying safely on the remaining engine. We are diverting to Shannon Airport in Ireland. Please remain calm. We'll be on the ground shortly. The cockpit door closed behind him after the announcement, muting the wave of gas and murmurs that had erupted in the cabin. Inside, Marcus exhaled. His eyes met Naomi's briefly. Gratitude unspoken, but clear. You've helped more than you know, he said quietly. Naomi's throat tightened. She thought of the note she had written hours earlier. Dismissed, crumpled by Brenda. She thought of Arthur's sneers, of the doubts cast upon her. And now, here she was, in the cockpit, her voice part of the very process that kept hundreds of lives safe. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, softly, she replied, Thank you for listening. The aircraft sailed on through the dark Atlantic sky, one engine silent, the other steady, in the heart of crisis. Unlikely allies had formed, and dignity had found its place where it belonged, in the center of trust. When Naomi Carter stepped back into the cabin, silence fell like a curtain. For a few moments, no one moved. Passengers stared at her as though she carried the very heartbeat of the plane. Her heels clicked softly on the aisle floor. She felt the warmth of the cockpit at her back, the lingering hum of a single engine beneath her feet, and the weight of dozens of eyes. Then, a voice from the middle rows broke the hush. The young man across the aisle, who had spoken up earlier, leaned forward. You were in there, weren't you? With the captain. Naomi met his gaze. Yes. His words burst out, reverent and shaken. He listened to you. A ripple went through the cabin, murmurs weaving from row to row. Relief, awe, even apology carried in the undertone. A woman with tear-streaked cheeks clasped her hands. The businessman who had once dismissed her now nodded slowly. His lips pressed tight in recognition. Only Brenda Collins tried to stem the tide. She stormed forward, her face flushed. Everyone remained calm. Please, this passenger is not part of the crew. She is not authorized. Naomi lifted her hand gently, not to silence, but to steady. I didn't touch a single control, she said evenly. I simply described what I observed, and the captain confirmed it. That's all. Her calm cut through Brenda's panic like glass through fog. Arthur Blake could not stay quiet. His voice, sharp and brittle, rose from the front row. This is insane. We're trusting the word of some passenger. What if she's wrong? What if she makes it worse? Gas followed, but this time no one supported him. Instead, a middle-aged woman who had sat in quiet fear all night turned on him with sudden steel. She saw this coming when you were still mocking her. The woman snapped. She paid attention when none of us did. The young man chimed in. If the captain trusts her, so do I. The businessman added, voice gravelly. She's the reason we're not panicking in smoke right now. Show some respect. Arthur flushed, sputtering. But the tide had turned. For the first time since takeoff, Naomi felt the balance of the cabin shift not against her, but toward her. Chloe Ramirez emerged from the galley, her expression radiant with a mix of pride and relief. She moved to Naomi's side almost instinctively, like a guard protecting a flame. "Dr. Carter, would you like some water?" she asked softly. Naomi accepted with a nod. The gesture was small, but the symbolism was loud, the younger attendant standing by her, while Brenda seethed alone. Brenda hissed in Chloe's direction. "You're undermining protocol?" Chloe met her eyes calmly. "No, Brenda. I'm honoring courage." The words drew a quiet cheer from somewhere in the rear rows. It spread, fragile at first, then louder as passengers clapped, some timidly, others with genuine conviction. Applause rolled down the cabin, not raucous, but steady, a sound of solidarity in the face of fear. Naomi's throat tightened. She hadn't sought applause. She had only wanted to be heard. But this was something else entirely. Brenda tried again, voice shrill. "Enough, sit down. This is a safety violation." But the passengers no longer listened to her. The energy in the cabin had shifted beyond her grasp. Arthur grumbled under his breath, folding his arms, but he, too, fell silent when he realized no one stood with him anymore. Naomi spoke, her voice low but clear enough to carry. "I'm not here to replace anyone. I'm here because this plane matters to every single one of us, and sometimes it only takes one voice to remind us what's real." The cabin hushed again, this time not out of fear, but out of reverence. A man from the rear leaned forward, his accent thick, but his words sure. "Thank you, miss, for speaking when others wouldn't." Naomi bowed her head slightly. She sat back in her seat, Chloe lingering near her, protective. The applause faded into murmurs of comfort. Strangers leaning toward one another. Passengers who had never spoken exchanging quiet words of courage. For the first time since takeoff, Naomi felt a fragile thread of community weaving its way through the rows of anxious faces. Yet the tension was not over. The plane shuddered again, a reminder that their safety hung on one remaining engine. The lights dimmed briefly, then steadied. Fear crept back in like a cold draft. But this time, instead of dissolving into panic, the cabin held together. Parents comforted children, strangers squeezed hands, and all eyes, when they flicked toward Naomi, carried trust rather than suspicion. Brenda retreated toward the galley, her authority drained. Arthur hunched into his seat, silenced not by rules, but by the weight of his own isolation. Naomi leaned her head back for the first time that night, exhaustion tugging at her bones. But beneath the fatigue was something steadier resolve. She had been tested, dismissed, humiliated, yet dignity had not wavered. And now, even in this perilous sky, it was dignity that bound the cabin together. She whispered to herself, almost a prayer machine's talk, and so do people, when we choose to listen. The hum of the lone engine carried them onward through the dark Atlantic. Behind her closed eyes, Naomi pictured land, safety, a runway lined with lights. But for now, she held on to what mattered most, that she had spoken. She had been heard, and an entire cabin had changed because of it. The announcement crackled through the intercom. Captain Marcus Thorne's voice steady, though it carried a gravity no one could miss. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be diverting to Boston Logan International for an emergency landing. Please remain calm and follow crew instructions." A hush fell again. The hum of a single engine was louder than ever, the sound of a lifeline holding hundreds of lives aloft. Naomi Carter straightened in her seat, sensing the fragile balance of fear and hope. She glanced around. The businessman, who had once dismissed her, was gripping his seatbelt, his knuckles pale. The young man across the aisle looked toward her, his eyes wide, searching for reassurance. Parents pulled children close, whispering soothing words they didn't quite believe. Naomi rose. Chloe Ramirez touched her arm. "Do you want to say something?" Naomi hesitated. She was not the captain, not the crew, but she was, at this moment, the heart the cabin had chosen to trust. She nodded. Chloe handed her the intercom. Naomi's voice carried softly but firmly through the speakers. "This has been a long night for all of us. I know fear is heavy right now, but I also know we are stronger than it. Look around you, every single one of us wants the same thing, to get home safe. And we will, because we've already proven something tonight, that when one of us is heard, all of us rise. Stay calm, hold each other, and remember we are not alone in this sky." As her words faded, a wave of stillness followed. Not despair this time, but resolve. A mother kissed her child's forehead. The businessman unclenched his hands and exhaled. The young man across the aisle whispered, "We're going to make it." The descent began. The cabin lights dimmed. The ground, invisible in the dark, seemed to pull at them with unseen hands. The plane shuddered again, a violent lurch that sent gas rippling down the rows. Naomi gripped the armrest, but kept her eyes forward. She knew enough aerodynamics to understand the stress, the strain on metal and turbine, but she also knew the skill in that cockpit and the truth that human courage could be as steadying as any machine. Chloe moved through the aisle, her voice calm as she repeated safety instructions. This time, passengers listened not out of fear, but out of trust. Brenda Collins stood frozen near the galley. Authority had slipped from her hands hours ago. She glanced at Naomi with a look Naomi couldn't quite read: shame, perhaps, or defiance still clinging to the edges. But Brenda said nothing. The runway lights appeared in the distance, faint sparks against the horizon. Relief rippled quietly as people pressed closer to the windows. Captain Thorne's voice returned. "Brace position." Passengers bent forward. Hearts pounded. The cabin filled with a silence so deep it almost roared. Naomi closed her eyes. She thought of her parents, of the first time she'd held a wrench in her hand as a girl, of the long road from South Carolina workshops to corporate boardrooms. She thought of all the times her voice had been overlooked, all the doors she had forced open with patience instead of rage. And now, here she was, still standing, still believing, still speaking. The wheels struck the runway with a thunderous boom. The plane bounced, groaned, then steadied as Captain Thorne fought the controls. Smoke trailed briefly along the wings. Passengers screamed, then held their breath as the aircraft hurtled down the asphalt. Brakes screeched. The world tilted forward. Luggage rattled in overhead bins. Then, with a final shudder, the plane slowed to a crawl. For a moment, no one moved. Then the cabin erupted in applause, sobs, laughter, an orchestra of raw survival. Strangers hugged. Children cried into their parents' shoulders. The businessman pressed his palms together as if in prayer. Naomi felt Chloe's arms around her. "We made it," Chloe whispered, tears on her cheeks. Naomi nodded, her own throat thick. "Yes, we did." Emergency vehicles swarmed outside the windows, red and blue lights flickering across faces pressed to the glass. Fire crews stood ready, but the danger was behind them now. Captain Thorne appeared at the cabin door, his uniform damp with sweat. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Boston." His voice cracked slightly, but his smile was real. "And thank you for your courage tonight." His eyes found Naomi. He didn't speak her name aloud, but the gratitude in his look was louder than any words. Arthur Blake tried to slip away unseen. His arrogance shriveled. But passengers stopped him, not with violence, but with silence sharper than any blade. He walked the aisle under their gaze, his head bowed. Brenda approached Naomi, her lips trembling. I should have listened." Her voice was barely a whisper. Naomi held her gaze. "It's not too late to start." Brenda looked away, tears welling. She turned and left the cabin. As passengers filed out, Naomi lingered, stepping onto the jet bridge only when most had gone. The cool Boston air hit her face, sharp and fresh. She inhaled deeply. Chloe caught up with her. "Dr. Carter, you saved us." Naomi shook her head. "No, we saved each other. That's what matters." Reporters waited beyond security. Phones were already buzzing with clips, whispers, and hashtags. But Naomi didn't care about the noise. What mattered was simpler lives carried safely to ground, a cabin that had found its voice, and a reminder that dignity could rewrite even the darkest chapters. She glanced back once at the plane, its silver body gleaming beneath the floodlights. The machine had endured. So had they. And in the quiet of her heart, Naomi carried a truth she hoped every passenger had learned when justice is ignored. When voices are silenced, it only takes one person to speak for an entire cabin, an entire world. To change course, life often puts us in moments where silence feels safer than speaking up. But this story reminds us that dignity is not found in being loud. It is found in being steady, even when others try to silence us. Naomi's calm insistence on truth shows that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it speaks softly, yet firmly, in the face of doubt. For older generations, this lesson feels familiar. Many of us know what it is like to be overlooked or underestimated. We know the weight of being told you don't belong here. But the story teaches that when we hold on to our self-respect, when we choose patience over anger, we not only protect ourselves, we open the door for others to see, to listen, and to change. The real victory is not just survival, but transformation. A cabin once divided by prejudice became united by respect. And isn't that what life is about, turning pain into purpose, and isolation into community? So the message is clear. Never underestimate the quiet power of your own voice. It might just save more than you realize. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life, and together, we can keep spreading voices that matter.